Alrighty, welcome back. So now that we know what the project's all about, let's dive into doing the modeling portion of the project. And I think the first object we're going to tackle is going to be the orange. And while it might be a seemingly easy object, we really want to capture all of the subtle little details of the object to try and make something that's semi-photorealistic. So I'm a big advocate of always making sure you have reference. So I just went into Google image search here and I typed in orange fruit. If you type in just orange, you get just a bunch of orange colored objects. And if you really sort of study the objects, you can see that we have all of these sort of little subtle creases here around the tip. You get the little stem that has these little florets around it. And in most cases, it looks like there's about 8 of these creases around the top of the orange. And for the little florets, 3, 5, doesn't seem to have a fixed size on that. So just looking at some of these images, I think this is what we're going to be going for. Basically the mostly round orange with a little bit of stem, and then we're going to capture the subtle little details on here. So I think we're going to just basically do the modeling of the object. We're going to do a little bit of sculpting here to get these creases in the top. And then we're going to use some displacement later on to capture these subtle little fine details. So now that we know what it is we're going to be doing, let's dive in and get busy. So first things first, I'm going to be working for this part in the modeling interface. So you might be used to using the layout switcher here to switch between the various layouts. I personally like having the little bit of extra screen real estate that you get from having this minimized. So when you have that minimized, I prefer to use the control tab switcher, and that pops up these little icons you can just switch through. So I'm going to be in the model tab. And if by chance you might have modified your interface and you want to make sure that you're working from the base interface just so you can follow along more easily, we can go up here, go to File, and then Reset. And that should set our interface back to what the default was when Modo first installed. Alright, with our interface set, let's get to modeling. So we're just going to click up here on our sphere tool, and we're going to click and drag, holding down the control key as close as we can to the origin. And to ensure that we're getting a centered object, we want to use this gang edit guys here. We want to make sure those say equals, and then I can just hit 0 and enter. It'll make sure that that's right there centered the origin. And I will also use the gang edit option there to make that 500 millimeter. Enter. So we want a 1 meter size, which is quite a bit bigger than an actual orange. In this case, we're going to be doing some simulation later down the line, so I like things to be bigger than they actually are, just so we can minimize any issues with margins and that sort of stuff by simulating such small objects. We can scale them later on anyways, so it's kind of not really relevant at this particular point. So, and by default, you'll get a globe object, and we're going to be doing some sculpting at the top here, and these triangles are going to cause us some problems, so I think we would actually prefer to work with a quad ball on that, and then we're going to give that a subdivision of 7, just so we have a edge that runs right through the center on that. And then you want to make sure that your polygon type is Catmull-Clark, because we're going to be doing sculpting on that, and we need to do the multi-resolution sculpting, and that is a requirement of the multi-resolution sculpting that there be Catmull-Clark polygons. So we can just drop the tool with the Q, and if there's any other question about what type of polygons you have, you can just select them and then just go down here to this polygons, and this will tell you that those selected polygons are Catmull-Clark. So that works as the indicator. So that gives us basically a perfect sphere in our object, but we want to add these little details and a little bit of extra geometry across the top. So I'm going to select these 4 top polygons just by clicking and dragging on there. And then we're going to get our Polygon Bevel. So that is a Shift-B shortcut key, Polygon Bevel there in our toolbox. And just click to activate that, and then we can use these little handles in the interface to do our little bevel. We're going to bevel that down a little bit, and then hit Shift and left mouse button click again to start a new bevel. And I just want to kind of get that little dimple that's going to be at the top of the orange. So you might notice I had some extra little displays there on the top, and I should point out to you, if you go into your system and your preferences, and you go to tool handles, I have those set to advanced. So I just prefer the additional information readouts that you can get from the advanced tools. Some people think the UI is a little bit too much and they prefer that hidden, but if you'd like to try and use that, that is how I enabled that. So, and if you look at the non-subdivided object now, you can see that these are perfect squares, and I would want to make them circular. So what I can do is select those edges, and then in 901 there is a new option under the deform where we can turn those into evenly spaced radials. And I can actually select this polygon loop here and do the exact same thing. Maybe scale that down a little bit. So now if we take this and convert this back to the Catmull-Clark subdivisions by holding down Shift and Tab, we want to be mindful of this silhouette here that we're creating. So by selecting the polygons, I'm going to hit Shift up arrow to grow out that selection. I'm going to look here at the silhouette, the side view of this, and see that it's kind of creating this bump on the top that I don't really want. So hitting the W key, I'm going to pull that down ever so slightly, just so that we can kind of create that curved area, and maybe pull these polygons down a little bit more. So I have a very organic approach to the way that I model. If I modeled this 10 times, I'd probably model it 10 different ways. So don't feel you have to follow along with exactly the methods that I'm using. It's just helpful to see the workflow of how I get to achieving my final result. Okay, so I think the next thing that we're going to do is we want to start doing a little bit of sculpting up here to get in those creases. So I think we're going to jump into our painting layout. So that is Control Tab, jump over into Paint. Now for this portion, I prefer to use a Wacom tablet. I think for most of what we're going to be doing for this is pretty simple sculpting. So you could probably just get away with using your mouse if you don't have a tablet, but for me it's just easier to use a tablet. If you're going to be doing a little bit more sculpting, you might consider getting one yourself if you don't have one already. It's just more of a natural way of working with your object. So I think since our object had since the original orange had 8 of these little creases at the top, we can just follow along with this geometry up here. So the first thing we need to do in order to make sure that we can sculpt our object is we're in the sculpting toolbox here, and then we want to drag this down, make sure that we can see. We want to enable multi-resolution. So by clicking this little box with our object item selected, that will enable the multi-resolution functionality that lets us do the sculpting we want to do. And I'm going to turn up our maximum level here to 5. And then we can just test this out real quick here. Just grab the push tool by clicking on it. And any tool selected will give you this little HUD, this little heads-up display, where you can quickly select your subdivision layers. You can set the offset of the tool, and the step is the dab sort of in between each one of these guys. So we can just do a little quick stroke here. It seems to be working. And by right mouse button clicking, or the equivalent on your tablet with a tool active, we can slide left and right to change the size of that sculpting brush. So that seems to be doing what we want. So I think for first, I'm going to use the carve tool, make this kind of small. I want to carve out these little creases in the top of the orange. So I really like the trackball rotation because you can rotate it around to get things to a more natural angle, so you're not constantly trying to come at it at the wrong angle. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of dig in these little creases in the top. Always make sure you're checking out your silhouette there so that you're not getting any surprises. I actually think I want to dig in a little bit deeper here. And the nice thing about sculpting natural organic shapes like this is you don't have to be perfect in everything that you do. Grab the push tool, maybe grow these out a little bit here. And the nice thing about using a tablet is you can sort of fade it out more naturally just using the pin pressure as you press against the tablet. So I think we're going to grow those out a little bit. And like I said, you got to keep looking at that silhouette to make sure we're not going crazy and sticking those out too far. Then I'm going to use this tangent pinch. I'm going to pinch these guys in here to make these more of a crease. So you want to kind of pinch that right over the top of that ridge. And we're going to get the smooth tool here. And we want to kind of smooth out. So maybe these guys are a little bit too high. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I think there's one little dimple at the bottom of the object, so I'm going to use the push tool. By holding down the control key, we get the opposite action of what you would normally get. And by holding down the shift, you can kind of smooth that out a little bit. Alt key obviously rotates your viewport. So that'll just add in that little dimple that you normally see at the bottom of the orange. So I think in terms of those details, I think that is actually pretty close to what we want for that. So a lot of the oranges were a little bit oblong, so I think I'm going to do a subtle little change to the scaling on this. I hit Control Tab and jump back to the model here. And we can still go into our polygons and select these polygons and tweak them. So I just selected them and hit the Shift Up arrow so that I could grow that selection out and select half of my orange. Now I'm going to hit the Move tool, W, and I want to grab a fall off, and I'm going to have the cylinder fall off on this. And I want to make sure that is on the Y. And since I had the Move tool active first, it just snapped to the exact scale of what I'm doing here. And I want to set my scale, I think, from linear to ease out. So I'm just going to scale this top part down a little bit. Not too much. Just want to sort of bring that down so it's not an exact perfect circle. And I think I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side as well. Just scale that up ever so slightly. So that way we won't have the perfect, exactly round shape of the orange. So let's go in and we're going to save our object here really quick. Let's make sure we save this into the right spot. I'm going to call this orange 1. So I'm just going to write over that so that you can see exactly what it is that I'm working here. And we want to call this the orange. So let's go in and model the little stem guy now. So I think we can select these guys and get our work plane. Align work plane to selection, and that'll work. Align that right there. And then we're going to press in to create a new item layer. And we're going to create our initial stem in a new layer just to make it easier to facilitate. Of course, that's not the direction we want. Try this again. All right. And that is definitely too many segments. So I want the sides to be 8. And then we're going to say segments 2. And I think 19.5, yeah, that's about good on the size. And we want to make sure that that's resting up above the orange. All right, so we're going to make these little floret things that hang off the side. So I'm going to do that by beveling, but I need to bevel these out separately. Otherwise, they're all, with the group polygon option, they're going to all come out together. So Shift B to bevel that. And you see if I click and I push outward, they're going to scale up in sort of a weird way. And I don't want that. So I'm just going to click, get the bevel, and then I'm going to hit Q to drop the tool. Then I'm going to enable the R for scale. And then I'm going to scale them outwards. And they don't even need to be scaled out very far. And I think scale them in to make them a little pointy. Now we're going to do the same thing the other direction. Shift B, click, Q to drop, R to scale. All right, so I think now we're going to hit Shift Tab. I'm going to grab these. Now I'm going to put a little holding edge down here so that I can scale in the center part a little bit more. So that is Alt-C, gets us our loop slice tool, and I can just click there, and then dragging up and down sort of points where we're going to put our loop slice. Select that top polygon, Shift up arrow, and then R to scale. We're going to bring that little stem bit in. We don't want a very big piece of stem. Bevel that in a little bit. So is that looking to be about the right size for the rest of our orange? Maybe we want it to be just a smidge bigger. So we'll scale that with the R. And I think we're going to select these outer bits of the florets. We're going to bring them up so that they look like they're sort of resting down inside of there. All right, so now that we have the basic shape down for what we want on these florets, I'm going to subdivide it, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to use the sculpting tools again, but I'm not going to do multi-resolution sculpting on this. I'm just going to do some basic sculpting to sort of make it more organic so that every point is not exactly the same. So Shift D will bring up our polygon subdivide, and I'm just going to go in here to Catmull Clark and subdivide that down. That's just going to add more polygons in here to give us some more information to work with. So now hit Control Tab to get back to our paint interface. And I like to just use the Move tool. So I think I'm going to grab the Move, scale it, and we don't need to enable multi-resolution or anything. We're just going to be modifying the raw polygons here. But let's see what we can do to sort of make this a little bit more organic shaped. Just by grabbing some of these points. Trying to make this just look a little more natural. All right, I think that's pretty acceptable for what we're going for. So I should just point out that we're going to be trying to set the foundation for doing photorealism in this tutorial, but I'm not going to be spending the extra time to really go in and add all of the micro details of everything to make something super photoreal. So you're welcome to really dive in and look at the reference and capture it the best that you can. Hopefully the techniques that I'm showing you give you enough information that you'll be able to expand on that and make these your own. But I think for our purposes on this tutorial that is good enough. So we're going to reset the work plane and let's look with that. So I think that looks pretty good for our purposes. So we're going to call this stem. Make sure things are well named. Maybe give this some surfacing. So select the polygons, press M to open our set assign material dialog, and we're going to call this orange stem. Give that a green color. Just accept the defaults. Go back to our orange, and this is just going to be called orange flesh. Give that an orange color. Alright, I think that is the basics for our model. So using the modeling tools, we're able to make our orange using some basic bevels and some deformation tools. Then we're able to use the sculpting tools to add in our subtle details really easily. In the next video, we're going to jump in and we're going to add our textures on there, and it's going to really add in that final bit of photorealistic detail that we want for our object.